Okay, welcome to Part B, Lecture 7. Let's move on to China. We've already addressed Chinese cash coins, coins that were produced in the latter part of the first millennium BC, created by cast mold with a hole in the middle, because they were primarily copper, although they had some other metals mixed in there. And as such, they had a relatively low value compared to silver or gold, and so you needed a lot of them to complete a transaction. And so a string of cash was could range from 1,000 cash coins, maybe a few hundred, and were used for large transactions. And you'll remember that really the peak of ancient Chinese civilization came under the Han Dynasty. 4 century long rule. Under the Han, the Silk Road was established, urbanization increased, entrepreneurship, economic prosperity, significant growth in the money economy, about 220 million cash coins produced every year. The population under the Han Dynasty was about 60 million. They actually had the Han Dynasty ordered an official census to be taken around, I believe it was in the year 4, AD 4. And so this is a prosperous civilization. Also importantly, the advent of papermaking. Papermaking takes place under the Han Dynasty. Now, the ancient Egyptians had used papyrus, but papyrus is a thicker material. It's much rougher and uneven, the surface that is. And so this was quite an advancement. Moving on to the medieval period, the Tang Dynasty was also another prosperous civilization in this time medieval China. You'll notice the Han here, of course, controlled the eastern half of what today is China, but began to explore west and began to dominate or exert hegemony over the western regions. By the time of the Tang Dynasty, the Tang actually had just hundreds of thousands of soldiers moving toward Inner Asia and dominated Inner Asia as a result. Chinese culture flourished during this period. The Silk Road also flourished during this medieval period. May have been the most advanced civilization in the world at this time. There would have, that's debatable. Remember, in the Middle East, golden age of Islam at the time, and also the Byzantine Empire would have rivaled the Tang Dynasty. But I mean, right up there as far as economic and cultural advancement. Also, very maritime civilization, sending ships to through the Indian Ocean, and even as far as the Persian Gulf. Lots of contacts with civilizations further west. In fact, it was during this time that the Chinese adopted chairs, which they had learned from their contacts in the Middle East and in Persia. Not a bad adaptation. The chair, I think most of us would approve of something like that. And then in turn exported to the Islamic world silk and porcelain through these trade routes or through the Indian Ocean routes, but primarily through the Silk Road routes. In fact, the capital, the leading city of the Tang Dynasty was Chang'an, which today is the Chinese city Xi'an, Xi'an. But Silk Road, very prosperous in this period. There's the Byzantine Empire, Constantinople, roughly 4,000 miles. So commercial trade is flourishing. Some of these Chinese commodities, highly desired in the West. These are all from the period, from the Tang Dynasty and Song Dynasty, which we'll see in a moment, period. Beautiful pieces. The Tang Dynasty also developed woodblock printing, which was a technique for placing prints on textiles and then later paper. And of course, as you'll see, quite important for this class, but the old woodblock printing. Movable type will come a little later, around the 11th century. That first woodblock printing dominated. It's a woodblock print. Lots and lots of cash coins in this period. All this trade, you're going to need money, and the Tang Dynasty issued is millions and millions of cash coins. In fact, 327 million per year, so not quite double, but maybe a time and a half more than the Han Dynasty. These cash coins are under a Tang Dynasty were about 83% copper on average, 15% lead, and 2% tin. So a pretty solid copper coin. Nevertheless, it's still copper, and so you need a whole lot of these coins in order to equal what 1 ounce of silver could equal. You needed 1,000 cash coins actually to equal 1 ounce of silver. That was the official rate. A string of cash. And with trade flourishing all throughout the Silk Road, Chinese merchants began demanding a more portable currency. They turned to woodblock printing, and Chinese merchants during this Tang Dynasty, not the state, but the merchants, invented what they called flying cash. Flying cash. It was called flying cash because of its ability to travel long distances as opposed to bulkier strings of cash. At first, these were issued by private merchants, not the state. Now, this was not a fiat paper currency. It was, you may describe as the world's first banknote. That has some problems too, because they aren't official banks necessarily, like you would think of a bank today. But again, a private merchant would draw up these bills in order to avoid the inconvenience of hauling cash coins long distance. Draw up this bill that was redeemable in cash coins. So in a way, this is a representative money. It represented cash coins, and the merchant was then obligated to exchange or to redeem that paper money or the paper bill for that particular sum of cash coins, and the sum of cash coins was notated on the bill. So redeemability, the act of taking a representative money, a paper bill that represents a certain number of hard coins, and then presenting it for redemption meant presenting it to the issuer in order to receive then that sum of cash coins. See how that's different than a fiat paper currency. It actually literally represents a certain amount of hard assets, cash coins in this case. Now, was this a widely used currency? Not really in the beginning centuries. It was primarily used by merchants and long-distance tradesmen, not common people. These notes represented very large amounts of cash coins, so ordinary people are not using this new form of cash. They're using cash coins. Nevertheless, obviously, this is a major development in the history of money. The development of a paper bill that represents money and effectively acts as money, functions as money for those who circulate it. Nevertheless, however, like I said, vast majority of people are using cash coins. Well, the Tang Dynasty falls and a new dynasty, the Song Dynasty assumes power in the 10th century. And under the Song Dynasty, we have an even more prosperous and advanced civilization. The Song were the first people to use gunpowder. So gunpowder has its origin in this dynasty. The invention of the compass, water-powered mechanical clocks, the use of coal as a source of fuel, joint stock companies, private investment. In fact, actually, this was a relatively free market economy under the Song Dynasty. Comparatively little government interference in economic and market transactions, and it was a remarkably prosperous economy. It's also the first Chinese dynasty to establish a standing navy, and so the Song Dynasty expands the navy, and the Chinese explore all throughout the South China Sea, but also into the Indian Ocean and the Persian Gulf. Not the first Chinese to do so, but the Chinese more and more dominate Indian Ocean trade. Some Song Dynasty era ships. In short, a very commercial civilization. And the population by this point in time in China under the Song was approximately 200 million people. So absolutely enormous. For that day civilization. And here's well, this is a bit later. Get to Zhang He in a moment. The voyage of a later Chinese admiral through the Indian Ocean, but this, under Song Dynasty is when these voyages began. It says the Chinese had contacts in East Africa and brought back giraffes and other exotic animals or commodities. Flying cash continues into the early Song Dynasty. Still issued by private merchants, not the state. Still redeemable in cash coins. Still used primarily by elite merchants, not by the common people. So that continues. However, under the Song Dynasty, this was a Song era Chinese cash coin, copper coin. Even more cash coins are issued, but this creates a problem for the Song. Look at that number. 6 billion cash coins minted every year at the peak of Song power. It had a little less copper than under Tang Dynasty. They were only 64% copper, 27% lead, and 9% tin. And the reason for that, copper began to face a shortage of copper. New sources of copper became more scarce, especially by the 11th and then especially by the 12th century. The Song Dynasty will reply to its copper shortage by, well, first decreasing the amount of copper in the cash coin so that they can produce 6 billion a year. But they're also going to take a look at flying cash, and will take that idea from the merchants and co-opt it for their own purposes and issue a state paper currency. We'll look at the onset of a state-run paper currency in China under the Song Dynasty in the 11th century for part C of this lecture. See you there.